So we will shortly introduce our panel, but of course feel free to add something. Kai is well known in the field. Actually, he was also the scientific lead at the beginning of Work Package Tech. So a lot of things what we finished, he started actually. Besides this, he changed a lot of locations. He worked as an innovative medicine, R&D, clinical innovation, and Johnson & Johnson. Then he founded Deep Measures, where I think he's now the CEO. I have heard that Deep Measures is growing a lot. I think he will tell us more about it. And of course, he also co-founded eClinical Health, which produced the product CleanPaw, which was a major part in radial.
Next, we have Mira, who requires no further introduction from UMCU.
And then we have Kit. Kit is professor for biostatistics at Radboud University Medical Center Nijmegen. And he's also chair of the Methodology Working Party of the European Medicine Agency. And his research focuses on design and analytics of clinical trial with an emphasis on innovation design, rare diseases, and very important, bridging the gap between clinical trials and real-world evidence.
And then my lovely Work Package 1 co-lead and lead of the whole project, Kim Hawkins, who is from Sanofi and again doesn't require any more introduction. And then Peter, of course.
We have prepared some, not statements, but questions for our audience, which we would go through. And of course, if there are questions from the audience or online, Petra is again monitoring. Please throw them in. Like we said at the beginning, the topic's about the future of DCTs. So should we start with the first? We should have them on the slides here. This point has discussed these days a lot. And the question is, which stakeholder group has the biggest role in moving DCTs forward and why? And what I didn't mention yet, I would like the audience to make bold statements, because if possible, we would also catch in the agreement or non-agreement to statements from the room. I know that Kai is a good candidate to make bold statements, so go ahead. So the first question or statement is on the screen. Someone to take this up?
I'm happy to start with this, but first of all, thank you guys for actually finishing the mission. So I was part of the first couple of years, and then I went on to do something else, and I'll maybe come back to that. I had good reasons for it, but it's been a big body of work to do this. So thanks for seeing it through, and sorry for not being there. But happy to be back. Thanks for inviting me.
We are happy too, yeah.
So I think this panel is about, well, first of all, I want to go off script to begin with. So this panel is about the future of DCTs, and I just want to question whether there is a future for DCTs, just to start off with a bold statement. And the reason I'm worried about this space is that if you look at what's actually happening in the space, there's been, of course, we went through the pandemic, and that kind of really inflated the hype bubble, which now I would say has burst to a great degree. So if you look at some of the companies, so for example, Medable is one of the leading companies in this field. At the peak of their powers, there were 800 people or so. They're now 300 people. Science 37, another one of the early pioneering companies in this space, they went public. They had over $1 billion valuation. Then they were bought and went private again for 38 million. So they went pretty hard crash. Novo has cut their entire DCT team recently. So those are not good signals of a healthy ecosystem with growth and all of that. So I'm quite worried about it. And I think I know why this is happening. So because DCTs are basically an operational model to deliver studies in a different way. And I think the missing piece, we've heard it a few times today, is the evidence. So I think the problem is that we are, again, doing the same thing, that we are coming up with a new invention, like EDC was a replacement for paper, but in the initial stages, it was just electronic paper. It was only slightly better than paper. It only became 10 times better once we introduced risk-based monitoring and these kinds of things. So what is the equivalent in the DCT where that will help solve the value proposition, because right now I don't think the value proposition is strong enough. And that's why we are seeing these kind of things. There is no product market fit today. So how do we change that? So I think the evidence generation is the missing piece. So DCTs are a delivery mechanism for new types of science, precision measures that we have been missing. So those measures, that's why I went away to try to solve that part of the problem.
Company, yeah.
And now we need to connect the dots between DCTs and these precision measures that enable this whole new perspective into human health, where we can understand what's happening outside of the hospital. How is this disease or intervention impacting this person's health and all of that? So I think that's kind of the future that we need to enable. So that's kind of my opening statement. Just wanted to get out of the way. But yeah, which stakeholder group has the biggest role in moving DCTs forward and why? We asked this question recently, well, not so recently, but I was co-hosting a panel with the EMA, and we did a poll on the same exact question. The answer was the industry. So we asked, is it the industry, regulators, or the tech companies, the innovators? And the audience thought it was the industry. I actually disagree with that. I think it's all of the above, but we all have different roles to play. So you need the innovators to come up with new ways of doing things. You need the industry to adopt those things and get them tested. You need then the regulators to come on board to make sure it's done in an appropriate way and all of that. So I think we need everybody, which is what I think we have here in this room.
So it's great that we have these people. There were a lot of things already you touched. So maybe from the audience, some other one who wants to comment on things which Kai said.
Or do you want to go first?
And of course, the audience can also feel free to jump in.
Yeah, just you ask for provocative statements or kind of challenging. I think a few perspectives. So if we truly live what we preach, then we would actually say the patients. So if the patients actually will be requiring from us to do the trials differently, including decentralized elements, that actually should be enough to get us moving. But I'm not entirely sure whether that will happen, because some of the evidence today, costs for instance, might be a severe roadblock. So the second I would mention are companies. And that's actually also chipping in where I think we should probably move. Because I was really worried, and you saw that Peter was also worried about on the outcome of costs. There something needs to happen. It should be much more normal and standardized if we do the decentralized elements. And I think that is an assignment could be an assignment for industry. Why do we have to actually do that all independently? And as an example, which I also briefly discussed in the break, we had data standardization happening, CDISC, long time ago. When it just happened, the expectation, the hope was, this will reduce costs enormously, because every company has its own huge department of statistical programmers, statisticians, and if you see what they do, large parts are actually standardized. The safety analysis of trials is a fairly standardized matter. So why is everybody making his own standard programs? We are now at the stage that there is actually a platform between companies where codes are indeed shared and programs are shared to achieve some standardization. It took 15 years or so. I would put it to the companies, do we need to wait another 15 years to achieve something similar if we want to introduce decentralized elements of clinical trials, or can we do that a little bit faster because we have been smarter and we are easy? So that's where my company perspective as an important stakeholder to get things moving. I have a third one, but I can also wait for one of the other questions.
Yeah, we have quite some more statements, or questions, yeah. Good, so should we catch some influence or some input from the audience on the things? So Kai, your statement is that DCTs are not evolving.
Not evolving? Is that what you are?
Yeah.
No, I think DCTs are ready, but now we have this issue where we have the cart before the horse. We have the delivery mechanism, but we don't have the kind of precision measures ready that enables us to do like new kind of science. So we need to have like regulatory grade measures that we understand. We're still working on that part of the problem. The cart is like, DCTs are ready. There's like a room full of people who have largely been solving those problems for quite a while, but we need to kind of create that other component so we can actually measure new things outside of the hospital. We're great at measuring things in the hospital, but when the person leaves the hospital, we kind of lose that insight. And so the technology is there. It needs to be further validated so we understand what it means. We need to work with the patients to understand what should be measured, because now we can measure like hundreds of different things. We need to understand what matters the most, and we need to get acceptance from the authorities that they also understand and agree with us, and then that will enable this new science to actually have real impact all the way to patients, and that's kind of what I'm trying to work towards. So DCTs are absolutely essential for that.
Mira wants to also something to this.
Yeah, if I could respond to this, just so I agree with you that if we want to be able to move activities towards home, we need to be able to measure what we want to measure at home. But from an academic perspective, working at the UMCU, what we are seeing there is that we have over 10 projects now within our hospital in which we are moving care to the home situation. So there's home monitoring, there's other ways of doing care so that people either can leave the hospital earlier or they don't have to come to the hospital at all. So I do think there is a lot of movement there. And I think in clinical trials, we should, to a certain extent, follow clinical care. If we can do that for clinical care, why can't we do that for clinical trials? And I absolutely agree that we have to make sure that the development of the technology to measure those things at home and the use in clinical trials need to be really, really well agreed upon. So I think if we talk about stakeholders, I think the trial designers and the technology developers should maybe be talking at a much earlier stage about what we need in which trial and how.
Kim, yeah.
Yeah, just to add, especially, it's a very, very good comment about working together across industry, because, and just to build on the new way of collecting in endpoints and in different ways is, just to be clear, a very long process. And it takes a lot of investment, even for a single measure to move. So you can't just put something in a clinical trial and say we're going to decentralize it and it's a validated endpoint to be used for a regulatory approval. Like that can be multiple years. And for sure there's a part of proprietary in intellectual property that companies, that have invested that much want to benefit from. But there are other industry-wide, consortium-like activities that are going on where we see where, somebody's had the idea to pull together a group to develop a single digital biomarker that can then be used in the future by everybody. But, I mean, to your point, we should get better at that.
Good. There are questions already. Someone is in the room with microphone.
Just a question. I always come back to the patient or the participant. So that whole view of what matters in the end to them, what endpoint matters to them. We appear to have a gap somewhere in the ecosystem of how do we build a framework for patient groups to be able to do their own research. That was my question.
Someone can comment on it.
Can I maybe make a quick intervention? It depends what you mean by research. Are you talking about actually sponsoring a clinical trial, or are you talking about research into which endpoints matter to that patient group?
Yeah, and how can they get a validated endpoint that then academia, industry, anybody can draw on? They build the endpoints that they want the regulator to look at and measure them against.
Again, I made a comment during my presentation where I made a point of saying this is Peter Arlett speaking, not EMA, because it's not something that's in the planning. But I do believe that we need to support patient groups to firstly come together, have the dialogues with support, and because a discussion will be more fruitful if it follows a format, if you like, to also then navigate what is quite a complex regulatory landscape in terms of validation of biomarkers or whatever it may be. I think that requires some resourcing, quite frankly, and support. It's not there very much at the moment.
And we actually do have a platform for those kinds of things. And I've been talking to Maria, for example, like how do we educate patients to teach them about how they can contribute to this process of developing and defining new measures and explaining what things are meaningful to them, like building the conceptual model for a disease and having those patient preferences understood, because that's the beginning of developing a new measure. It doesn't start with the device, it starts with the patient. But then the patient involvement really extends all the way through that. So once you move into this, how do you then solution that? Then you need to think about usability, like how can they use this, how do they charge them, and what's the where, and what about the family, and kind of the logistics and the data transfer, all of that also needs to work. And the patients are the ones who have to deal with these things day to day. So patients need to be involved in bring this information to the regulators, do that together with the patients, because they can help you make your case and all of that. So we have basically already built a catalog so we can define these measures and the patient preferences and make them available for everybody. So everybody knows what matters to patients, and they can then invent the technologies and take that into account in their protocol design and all of that. So we've been working on that exact problem for the past many years. That's why I left this project to go to solve that problem.
Your company, yeah. I think there was another question. Yeah, one more question to this topic. Yeah.
Sorry, I would like to comment to what you just said. And as I think Peter heard this story before, because we've discussed it before, the problem is that if you look, for example, just take it as an example, patient preference study. I come from the patient, and we have preference studies. There is not a system to get these preferences into EMA unless the company brings them. We all know, and I think we can say this in this space, if companies conduct a patient preference study, you know what's in there. So there is still a gap. So patients can do a lot. We have like 5, 6 preference studies, whatever. And we said there's not a door where we can get it in. So yes, you can publish it, but, which we did, of course, but still then, nobody has to look at it. So I think there is a gap we seriously have to work on. And I'm worried about that for a long time, so it's not new.
Also, that problem we have worked on, and we are a registered SME with the EMA, so we have basically somewhat privileged access to the experts at the EMA, and we can bring these kinds of inputs and have these conversations with the agency and then publish the results in the catalog. So we can have these conversations directly with the authorities without that being tied to a specific drug program and a sponsor company. So that's something that we are ready to move forward with to solve that challenge as well, because these things need to be harmonized and not be company specific. We cannot have a J&J standard for something and then Novartis having a different standard. So we have been trying to orchestrate this across the ecosystem, and yeah, we are ready to kind of act on these challenges.
So I think there's a last question there, then because due to time we also have other slides what we want to touch upon. Is it okay, Julia? Or
yeah, it's okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Claudia Luati from the European Patients Forum, and thank you very much for the discussion. I just wanted to go back to this question on the stakeholder groups. I understand one of the learnings of your trial was also that it was difficult for you to get patients into the decentralized part, the remote part, because they didn't have that link with the healthcare professionals. They didn't have the healthcare professionals telling them and recommending them to enter those trials. So my question is really how to bring the healthcare professionals on board, build the awareness of the clinical trials, which is, I think, a bigger problem in terms of recruiting patients.
Mira, Kim, I guess.
Yeah, so I think within Radial, it was a combination of factors why it was difficult to recruit participants remotely. And one of them, indeed, we mentioned it this morning, was that when they were interested in what they saw online and they got to a landing page, there wasn't a clear link. At least that's our interpretation, right? Because that's always, it's our interpretation. There wasn't a clear link with trusted sites or trusted organizations where they felt that, that they continued on the landing page. I think even in decentralized models, you can you should deploy a combination of recruitment efforts. And I think we don't have the full answers yet. We were discussing several times today already that there's a massive new IHI project on recruitment, well, especially recruitment of underserved and underrepresented populations in clinical trials. But I think recruitment in general, there's some big question marks still within clinical trials. And what you are asking, how can you get the healthcare professional into decentralized recruitment? I think we have some examples where they have either their own database or they are active on social media, online, and through that measure. But I think there's a lot to learn still. So I don't think we have the answer on how to do that. We have the answer on what we maybe should not do to a certain extent. But
So do you want me to stop, or should, because I can add a little bit. It's kind of my answer to another one of the statements, but I do think that there's a couple things that need to drastically change. I mean, we need to teach healthcare professionals about clinical research, right? That should be standard. It should be more in depth than it is, and that's a society problem to solve. I think that we as an industry need to take a very hard look at how we design clinical trials and make them a lot more in line with routine medical care, right? And that kind of goes hand in hand with this like data wave that's coming. So right now we recruit patients from all the same sites that are in bigger cities, academic medical centers mostly, and it's a very small area. So we sort of like see this day coming where you get sick, you go see your physician, and they say, here are 5 approved products, here are 5 clinical trials. It is absolutely your choice. And the clinical trials aren't a huge burden because they're very much in line with the standard of care, how medical practice goes. Data can be extracted very easily from medical records, so you're not having to come into a clinic, 10 times when you would only go in once to see if you were given a medication that was already approved. So, I mean, I think there's a whole ecosystem that's going to have to change to truly get, and DCTs will enable a lot of that, right? Or could enable a lot of that, but there's a huge shift that needs to occur for all of those things to be coming together.
Good, thank you, Kim. Due to time, I would bring up some other questions. And now we want to know from you if you can think of distinct opportunities of DCTs over conventional trials, especially relating to collecting data as we started it. Kit, maybe you want to comment on it?
Yeah, I'll definitely start. I mean, this is where I think that, I'm so sorry.
Kit and Kim is similar, but you can both, no, Kim, sorry.
No, you go ahead.
I will take only a real small part of the of the cake, if you like, and actually also to highlight a point which I think we might not have touched upon enough today. I was trying to remember what was the first clinical trial I was involved in designing and guiding, which had decentral elements, and that was in 1995. And that was, I will not explain all the details, but there is a message there related to the question here. The main outcome there was investigating sleep quality. Main outcome was the Leeds sleep questionnaire. Some of you might be familiar, typically on paper. But we actually felt that was actually in terms of assessment. If you do that on paper, you do not have lots of control on when on the day that actual questionnaire will be filled in. So we had 2 reasons to actually consider, let's do that differently. And at that time we did it decentral, via phone, lots of organization. Luckily the technology was quite standardized at that time. In a sense it was simply your home phone. But then you manage actually the time point on which you will do the assessment much better than when you would do that in any centralized or paper version. And of course, we love to do something new. So those were the 2 main reasons. And the thing why I'm saying that, I think what we've not discussed a lot today, that's actually doing parts of your trial endpoints decentralized might actually give a better answer to the scientific question of interest, more efficiently or more appropriately or less biased. So I think that's a consideration I would add to this question. There are consider cases where actually decentralized will give you a better scientific answer to the question you originally had, because that's a strong motivation for every stakeholder.
I agree, especially in clinical research. This is maybe important. Kim, you want to comment?
I was going to say a very, very similar thing. So I won't add much other than in your example. I mean, I look at my sleep every single morning. It's the first thing I do. I probably shouldn't. I look at my watch. I wake up tired and I say, oh, it's because I slept 5.5 hours last night. And I feel a little bit validated. But there's something to be said for this sort of continuous measurement of exactly like you said, Megan, things that are important to patients, right? That really matter to patients, that are much better or could be much better, have the potential to be much better than trying to retrospectively say over the last week, over the last month, how did you sleep? And so if we can really design better devices to be able to really accurately measure those things that are important to patients in a more continuous way. I mean, the accuracy could go up, but you could also envision you could have smaller clinical trials that are needed, which would also help to accelerate the pace of medicine.
So then maybe I can ask a question to this. Do you think in trials or in radio we limited ourselves down as we use the same protocol for both arms, so to say, and not calculate in the potential of having the opportunity as at home to get more data, and by this to have this, what we just discussed, insight in there to get more knowledge about what's happening at home or regarding the disease?
Yeah, so I think regarding that aspect, yes, in radial we really made the conscious choice to compare these 3 operational models, and that meant we had to standardize certain elements between the 3 arms. So we already did much more in radial, maybe combined, than we should have done. So at a certain point, I know when we were building this, we wanted to put everything in that you could consider that you want to research for decentralization. But the part on, is the evidence more real-world evidence? Is it more capturing the daily practice? We only did that on one aspect, and that was where participants were reporting possible side effects. And in a conventional arm, that was done because I got a phone call at fixed time points, whereas in the hybrid and the remote arm that was done, they put that in the app the moment that something occurred, and we're still doing the analysis. But what's being seen is that the ones where the patients has the opportunity at least to report themselves, it seems that the AEs are reported quicker, the possible AEs, than in the other one.
No, I totally agree. I just like also the thinking of KIT on this level, but of course in radio we could not do it. But maybe all these factors should be calculated in the costs and all what we did, because it's a new knowledge. Some other thoughts of regarding this topic? You put another statement?
Yeah, we do this one briefly. So for KIT again, how do you think DCTs help with studying rare conditions? KIT.
KIT?
KIT.
Okay.
We can switch the order now. I will not, but in many ways I think for me on let's say on number 1 would be it allows broader inclusion. I think if anything in rare disease trials, you would actually love to reach every possible patient, independent of where they are, where they live, or where the closest hospital or physician is. So that would be number 1. It's easier said than done. I think some of the main reasons are presented here. The other one, which kind of worries me in this respect, is actually if you enter rare diseases, you also enter the area where diagnosis is actually quite difficult and can take a lot of time. So actually before knowing somebody suffers from a rare disease, probably there are lots of clinic visits already have happened. So I think on the one hand, the positive thing is broad inclusion. That's simply thought of, but I think it's actually a very challenging thing to do. So that's the first thing I think of in studying rare diseases. essentially reaching more patients.
Thank you, Kit. Does anyone from the audience have a question about rare diseases and DCTs?
And I can say a quick word about, because it was one of the case studies that we contributed to the project. We ran a rare disease study at Sanofi. The pivotal phase 3 study was 36 patients, which, you know, you're usually talking about hundreds of patients. And it took a lot of effort. I mean, probably a good year and a half to put the practices in place, but we allowed almost half of the patients. The treating centers were frequently a plane ride away for these patients. So we had one patient going from California to New York on a very regular basis, because that's just how rare the disease was and how rare the experts are. So we actually moved a couple of the assessments into the patient's home, but there were neurology assessments. So we had to pre-qualify the patient's house to make sure they had the right space to be able to do the assessments. We had to hire neurology trained assessors that could go into the home. And then we had the investigator on telemedicine supervising the assessment of the patient. So, and then we internally probably had 2 to 3 times the number of staff on that study, you know, which isn't insignificant. It's a big cost to be able to just troubleshoot all of those different aspects. But the patients were so appreciative of all of the effort that we put in place to make their lives a little bit easier and to be able to participate.
I think this is there's 2 ways you can approach this kind of problem, because the first problem is having access to the right number of participants, and then the second way that you can solve the same problem is that having as sensitive instruments as possible to measure the efficacy signal, because that is the math problem part of it. So if you have very crude instruments like a PRO, that's not going to be very sensitive. You need bigger population. Well, here it's kind of impossible. So you need to find the most sensitive instrument you can use to measure the signal that you're interested in. So you probably need to think about both options, like how do I create the right operations around the patient, but then also what are the instruments I'm using to measure it, and going after the most sensitive thing you can possibly find. So because you have to demonstrate to the agencies that you have clinically meaningful signal there, and it can be difficult if you only have 30 patients to work with. So,
okay, thank you. There's no questions on rare diseases. We'll move on to another statement, and I think this one is probably for Kim and then Peter. Can you say something about the status of global harmonization of regulation and process of DCTs?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with saying we need more of it, and it's not an easy thing to probably do. And I think it takes everybody putting the effort in. So it's not just a responsibility of the regulators to make this happen. I think it's the responsibility of all the key stakeholders to be working towards a common goal. And the more that we're engaging early and talking to each other and listening to patients and bringing that voice forward, the better it will be. But certainly the earlier, the more we do it together, I think that those will be the best outcomes that we can see.
Yeah, I'm going to say 2 things. Firstly, there are opportunities out there. So maybe the implementation of ICH E6 and the training and making sure people are on the same page when interpretation questions come up in the concept of decentralized elements would be one very practical thing. Maybe in terms of data collection, further development of ICH M11, so structured protocol data. On the other hand, I would then step back from the question. I would say here we are in Europe. There's a lot of work to be done in terms of harmonization. I mean, the annex that Monique presented to the DCP paper showing different national requirements and so on, I would focus quite a lot of energy within Europe, I think would be my answer.
So lots of work still to be done there. Would anyone else in the panel or the audience like to comment or ask a question? Yes, please.
I think on that point, Peter, and I work for the Critical Path Institute, so you might know Cecile Olivier, and so I'm one of her colleagues. Harmonisation also goes to terminology. And we are an organisation that receives significant funding from the FDA, but my interests are, to be honest, here in Europe. Don't tell anyone, but it's the truth. We use terms like digital biomarkers, digital endpoints, digitally derived endpoints, and we're not all on the same page. So to your point around harmonisation of member state approaches to approvals of clinical trials, we need to talk the same language as well. And I think that is something that we can address, I think, with this sort of group.
Can I just make a comment? Because just for your interest, and I was inspired, again, Monique, I'm going to mention your name again, but EMA has just initiated a study that we funded to look at harmonisation, if you like, or classification of terminology in this space. The contractor is called Confirms. Martin Posch, who many of you will know, is the principal investigator. So there is work that we are sponsoring, and I think the reason we're sponsoring it is that we totally agree that we need to make sure we're talking the same language. It then ties into making sure we collect data to do those regulatory science analyses that came up in the last session. Thank you.
Can you do that every time?
We can, not every time, my dear, but we can try. We can try.
Let's keep asking for things.
Thanks for the comment. We're just checking actually how long the session is, but because in the program is till 4:55, no?
No, 4:30.
So it's until half.
Okay.
Frantically.
Good. Then I would say if we need to close at 1:30. Actually now. That we make a very short round when everyone makes a statement around 1 minute, right? About your feeling about the future of DCTs as a closing remark for this session, but also, of course, this event here. Think of what are the biggest barriers and the biggest drivers, and it'll try to stay short.
Well, what I appreciate most about this, I guess, is the diversity of expertise in the room. So you have the wild cowboy innovators like myself. You have the industry people who are a key part of the engine to keep the machine going. You have the academics here. You have the patient voice in the room. And then you have the authorities here as well to make sure that we don't end up doing something stupid here. So we don't always all go to the same parties. So just want to thank IHI and the team here to bring this party together. So I think this is, we can make something happen here.
Yeah, we should meet once a year here in this room.
Yeah, if I could add one thing is that I think we shouldn't think about clinical trial innovations in silo. So we've been talking a lot about decentralization of clinical trials, but I really think we should combine different innovations together. So you have decentralization, you have pragmatic approaches, and also indeed the wealth of real data that we have laying around. So the electronic health records, to what extent can we utilize them? So I think that's where we should be heading. Combination of innovations to best answer the research questions that we have, and not assume to know what patients want to do and what sites can and want to do, but take them along in the process early. It's all been said already, but still.
Thanks, Mira.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, let's say being somewhat part of the start of the project and now seeing where it is today, I think it's really great to see the results and the potential that's there. Actually, my main message would be, can we define, following from the project as where it's now, concrete collaborative efforts moving forward? Because I think we are not there yet, and I think if anything, also what's being presented here gives that message as well. So I made the point on one of the potentials for collaboration, really concrete collaboration that stakeholders here could buy into and invest in. It would be great if we actually have one or two of those larger initiatives and actually make things work beyond the phase that Trials at Home today has reached.
So I'll keep it very, very short. And I'm going to quote Peter. I think data. I mean, I think we're on right on the edge of a wave that's going to really revolutionize the industry. And if we can really harness that data and use it in a different way, I think we can greatly simplify things, and DCTs will become really an enabler of a different way to run clinical trials.
So seize the day, maintain and strengthen the community, probably requirement for some kind of change management vehicle, because without thinking about communication, engagement, training, it won't happen. And with those elements, it'll happen.
Thanks a lot. Good. I think this is the closing statement. Thanks a lot for the audience, for the panelists again.